Every story in the Rhinelands begins with the wind. It's the constant howling voice of the land itself, a cold, bitter song sung by the twin peaks of the bear and the wolf. It scours the valleys, strips the leaves from the trees, and cuts through flesh to gnaw at the bone. The people of Woodsline, my people, have learned to live by its rhythm. We know when it whispers of a coming storm and when it screams of a gathering threat. On this day, the wind was a herald, announcing our grim pilgrimage. My name is Kellic, and the wind was my constant companion as it whipped the wolfskin cloak behind me, a gift from my father on the day I came of age. It moved like a great fur flag in the frigid breath of the mountain, and I swore I could feel the ghost of the wolf still clinging to the hide. It felt as though its spirit was fighting to break free and run wild into the snowy mists, a phantom tether pulling at my back. I'm a man of hardened muscle and stoic resolve, and I merely rolled my broad shoulders against the tug. You learn quickly in the Rhinelands that you cannot fight a spirit, but I wouldn't let it pull me from my path. The journey was difficult enough without a phantom companion. We were a small caravan of unfortunate souls, a label earned by the grim ritual that had brought us here. Every year, our village, Woodsline, held a lottery. It was a grim necessity, a sacrifice made for the survival of the many. 1 in 20 was chosen to make the perilous journey to the Hellsmouth, and no one ever returned without having faced tragedy. It was a fact that weighed on every soul in the caravan, a silent understanding that our lives were now a currency spent for the good of our people. The Rhinelands, in their brief, vibrant summers, were a sight to behold. Great emerald seas of grass swayed under the sun, dotted with the brilliant eruptions of northern wildflowers in every conceivable color. The land was a fleeting paradise, but a fickle one. Without a whisper of a warning, the short summer would vanish, and the Rhinelands would descend into a long, brutal winter. Woodsline, situated on the edge of a deep coniferous forest to the south, was well equipped to handle the cold. The trees provided all the wood we needed for our fires and shelters, and the forest teemed with deer and smaller game to feed the villagers. But even with a full larder and a warm hearth, something was always missing during the long freezes. The long winters turned the land barren, and the people of Woodsline, hardened as we were, longed for fresh greens, a vital need the forest could not provide. This was the purpose of our grim pilgrimage. The Hellsmouth, the village's salvation, lay at the base of a third mountain. Locals called it the Devil's Horn, a cursed and stinking dwarf in comparison to the majestic twin peaks. Charred and forever steaming, it spewed noxious gases and bubbling, mineral-rich waters from its deep crevices and caves. This foul discharge collected at the base of the mountain, forming a lake forever wreathed in a veil of hissing steam and the reek of rot and sulfur. The Hellsmouth was a festering wound on the landscape, a blight on the pristine valley. But within its steaming, corrupted embrace, life, the warm, mineral-rich waters breathed life into the desolate, frozen landscape. All year long, the basin was a verdant pocket of life, a vibrant oasis in the heart of winter. Delicious, scarlet-red berry bushes, aptly named Devil's Bowls by the villagers, grew in abundance. A strange bioluminescent algae known to have potent healing properties clung to the rocks at the water's edge. Even black-skinned root vegetables bursting with nutrients could be found buried in the soft, moist soil. Yet this bountiful paradise came with a terrible price. The waters of the Hellsmouth were said to be diseased, cursed by the devil himself. The legends told of those who, driven by thirst or madness, drank from the waters and were overcome with a crazed frenzy, a condition known as the devil's madness. The only known cure for this affliction was death. This was the true purpose of their grim pilgrimage. The Hellsmouth, the village's salvation, lay at the base of a third mountain, a cursed and stinking dwarf in comparison to its majestic siblings. Locals called it the Devil's Horn. Charred and forever steaming, it spewed noxious gases and bubbling mineral-rich waters from its crevasses and caves. This foul discharge collected at the base of the mountain, forming a lake that was forever wreathed in a veil of hissing steam and the reek of rot and sulfur. The Hellsmouth was a festering wound on the landscape, a blight on the pristine valley. But within its steaming, corrupted embrace, life thrived. The warm, mineral-rich waters breathed life into the desolate, frozen landscape. All year long, the basin was a verdant pocket of life, a vibrant oasis in the heart of winter. Delicious, scarlet-red berry bushes, aptly named devil's balls by the villagers, grew in abundance. A strange, bioluminescent algae, known to have potent healing properties, clung to the rocks at the water's edge. Even black-skinned root vegetables, bursting with nutrients, could be found buried in the soft, moist soil. Yet this bountiful paradise came with a terrible price. The waters of the Hellsmouth were said to be diseased, cursed by the devil himself. The legends told of those who, driven by thirst or madness, drank from the waters and were overcome with a crazed frenzy, a condition known as the devil's madness. The only known cure for this affliction was death. As the wild winds intensified, a long, mournful howl echoed through the valley. Kellick's gaze followed the sound, his eyes scanning the barely visible reaches of the wolf. He knew the sound well. It was the call of the pack, a warning that a great blizzard was on its final approach. The wolves would not be far behind. He pulled his cloak tighter around him, the leather-bound gloves on his hands gripping the edges of the thick fur. It was time to push on. "Can't these stinking snow-ox move any faster?" he bellowed, cupping his hands to amplify his voice against the storm. "We've got to move, or the storm will be the least of our worries. The wolf will have its children upon us before we can reach the Devil's Horn. Move!" His indirect order was heard and obeyed. He watched as several cartmen acknowledged him with a nod, whipping their reins against the hulking snow-ox. The massive beasts groaned in protest, but their pace increased, their massive bodies churning through the knee-deep snow. To his left, his war brother Fendrix battled through the snow to reach him. Fendrix was, by most accounts, the better-looking man. Clean-shaven save for a meticulously trimmed red beard, his long flame-colored hair adorned with intricate battle braids. He was a mountain of a man, with a frame even more massive than Kellick's. Like Kellick, he wore a carapace of bear jerkin, but he favored a two-handed battle axe, a brutal weapon that fit his size and temperament. Kellick, by contrast, preferred the quick, deadly grace of twin swords.
"Brother!" Fenrix yelled, his voice barely audible over the whipping wind. "One of the forward cart's snow-ox has collapsed. What shall we do?" "Leave it," Kellick barked, his voice carrying the authority of command. "It will be a distraction for the wolves. Tell the cartman if he does not keep up, he will become a distraction for the wolfkin as well." Kellick finished with a toothy, grim smile. But gallows humor was a grim necessity in this land. As the small detachment pushed on, the Devil's Horn came into view, a dark, steaming silhouette against the pale, bruised sky. It was a beacon of salvation. The heat radiating from the cursed peak would warm them and protect them from the coming storm. They could camp in this dangerous paradise, safe and warm. Suddenly, a cry of dismay cut through the wind. Kellick looked ahead and saw one of the cartsmen topple over, his body stiff and frozen solid. He was a casualty of the swelling snow squall, a grim testament to the speed of the approaching storm. Kellick screamed into the blistering cold ahead at one of the 5 other war brothers escorting the caravan. "Volvar, get the fuck on that cart. You're a cartman now. I can't wait to tell your wife about this." Kellick chuckled, a loud, booming laugh that seemed out of place in the desolate landscape. Leave the body. It was foretold by me that there would be a second distraction for the beasts behind us. He watched as the fur-covered warrior, Volvar, a man with a perpetually surly look and slick black hair, begrudgingly pulled himself into the driver's position. Volvar shook his head, a sneer on his face, before whipping the snow ox into action and rejoining the caravan. The blotted-out sun began to set as the caravan broke through the last vestiges of the storm and into the warmth of the Devil's Horn Basin. The mountains seemed to have its own weather, its geothermal heat creating a protective shield around the basin. The screaming winds of the blizzard were dulled to a mere whisper, and the snow, instead of accumulating, melted into a warm, gentle rain that pattered against the caravan as they unpacked. Kelyk wasted no time, his booming voice cutting through the brief moment of tranquility.
"Wolvar, Cardsman," he laughed again, the joke apparently never getting old for him. "Take Loken and Kiltar around the basin and scout the area. We do not want to be surprised by any unwanted visitors, man or beast." "Aye, war brother," Wolvar growled, waving a beckoning hand at his companions, Loken and Kiltar. His black hair was drenched in slick over his bearded face, his expression still unamused. Kelyk watched as the three war brothers headed into the warm rain and north toward the mountain's base, disappearing into the thick, vibrant green thicket. Their plan was to traverse the perimeter of the basin, circling around the slopes and returning to the camp on the eastern side of the pond. The basin itself was about half a mile around, a cauldron of hissing steam that stunk of rot and decay. As darkness descended upon the Rimelands, the pool of algae and waterweed seemed to darken, and shadows crept toward the camp like the obsidian blood of some otherworldly beast. "Get a fire started," Kelyk urged, his voice filled with a new sense of urgency. "Nightfall is upon us, and if we do not have light, we cannot fight." The cartsmen and gatherers, who had already begun prepping the fires, picked up their pace. They understood the stakes. If the cold didn't kill them, something else would. They needed to give the war brothers, the protectors of the caravan, the best possible fighting chance. Fenrix, ever the pragmatist, began to organize the townspeople into foraging groups. "Just because the sun god has closed his eyes doesn't mean we can't forage," Fenrix said with a smile. "You lot, find some devil's balls, would ya? You bunch, spot some sprout roots. You five, go start harvesting that gunk for the healing salve at the lake's edge." He pointed to the steaming basin, his voice dropping to a serious tone. "And don't drink the stinkin' water." An hour later, the camp was a hive of activity. Makeshift tents of snow ox skin had been pitched, and several large fires, fueled by the logs brought in the carts, burned brightly. The rich, savory smell of roasted snow squirrel wafted through the camp, a delicious perfume carried on the warm rain that pattered against Kelyk's tent. He felt as if he were in some far-off, unconquered land, a paradise ripe for the taking. But his sense of calm was short-lived. A gnawing ease began to settle in his gut. Where were his war brothers? Kelyk rose to his feet, unclipping his damp cloak and placing it gently on the ground. He mustn't anger the wolf. He pushed his large gloved hands through his rain-slicked dark hair, tying it into a tight bun. He shook his body, sending droplets of water flickering and glinting in the firelight, before stroking his beard in thought. "Fenrix," he said, turning to his brother who was sitting across the fire. "Where are our brothers? Can you hear their movements across the Hellsmouth?"
Fenrix, who had been tearing a chunk of meat from his roasted snow squirrel, also rose to his feet. He scanned the horizon toward the basin, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I do not," he said plainly, but his usual unconcerned demeanor was gone, replaced by a subtle tension in his posture. Kelyk exited his tent and walked to the edge of the hissing basin. He peered into the darkness, the firelight from the camp causing his vision to flicker and dance. Then he heard it.
A wild, menacing scream echoed from across the basin, a sound so full of anguish and madness that it seemed to move slowly, letting its cry sink deep into the hearts of the men in the caravan. Kellick's head darted north toward the base of the mountain as another wail sounded, this one a screech that ripped across the bubbling lake. Then another, and another, and another. The screams were a chorus of grotesque crows, a symphony of murder and madness. And they were coming. Adrenaline surged through Kellick's veins, the thumping of his heart a drumbeat in his ears. The warm rain had stopped, but a new kind of storm was brewing. His hands dropped to the scabbards on either side of his waist. He could feel the intricately smithed handles, one a wolf's head with gleaming blue eyes made from crystals found in the wolf, the other a bear's head with eyes of dark purple cave crystals from the bear. He drew both wolf's gaze and bear's leer, their polished steel blades shimmering with the reflections of fire and shadow. "Guardsmen, gatherers," he yelled, his voice cutting through the night. "Form a defensive circle at the fires. Fendrix, with me." He didn't need to look behind him to know that the cartsmen and gatherers were already forming a tight guard, makeshift weapons in hand. Even the civilians of Woodsline would fight to the death. He didn't need to turn to know that Fendrix was already at his side. "Kell," Fendrix said, his voice a low pant, "what do you think they are?" "Only the bear and the wolf know, Fendrix," Kellick said, a grim smile on his face. "But I haven't had a good fight in a while." "Aye," Fendrix replied, his own grin now visible in the firelight. "Not since I made you eat dirt last time we sparred." He brought his two-handed battle axe, a monstrous thing of sharpened steel and dark wood, to hand from his back. "Bear's fury has not tasted blood in some time." Despite the bravado, Kellick could see the fear in his mighty war brother's eyes. The screams had stopped, but the sounds of movement continued, a hissing and snapping from the ferns and brush on either side of the basin, as if a hive of crazed insects was rising to protect its queen. Kellick braced himself, listening to the trampling of feet as the beasts made their way toward the camp. Except they weren't beasts.
From his left, a shadow-enveloped figure stumbled out of the ferns and into the firelight. A set of crazed, blackened eyes stared at Kellick. Tattered hair, milky white skin, and ripped linens were all that remained of what was once a beautiful woman. She wavered, her head twitching sporadically back and forth as if in a struggle. Then, with a sudden, horrifying lurch, she charged. All was silent, save for the wet gushing sound of her feet splashing for the dampened soil. Kellick heard Fenrix gasp as he turned to witness the charging demon. The woman, with a terrifying, unnatural speed, closed the gap between the brush line and the war brothers. When she was within 10 feet, she crouched and lunged, her mouth open, revealing teeth rotted into jagged daggers. With a quick sidestep, Kellick swung his left arm down hard, Wolf's gaze shimmering as it sliced cleanly into the back of the creature's neck. The body, headless and still propelled by the momentum of its leap, lurched past the war brothers and crumpled in a distorted heap behind them. Kellick was now back to back with Fenrix. "What in the gods?" Fenrix began, but a scream from the north cut him off. Twitching body after body broke through the ferns and brushes on either side of the war brother vanguard. Each figure wailed and shrieked at the sight of the two giant warriors illuminated by the firelight, Fenrix facing north and Kellick south. Kellick's head darted from one side of the basin to the next, counting at least 20 of the screeching demons. He heard the cartsmen in their makeshift defensive line whimper at the sight of the disfigured hordes now staring blankly at them from the edge of the firelight. "Don't you fucking break ranks back there or I'll kill you myself," Kellick screamed, his voice a guttural command. "Let them come. Let them taste the steel of my blades. The bear and the wolf hunger," he bellowed into the vaporous night sky. "The bear and the wolf hunger," the backline cheered, a desperate rallying cry joined by Fenrix. Fenrix's axe glinted in Kellick's peripherals as he raised his twin swords in the air, whirling them in a display of practiced blade mastery. Dark blood sprinkled into the night as Wolf's gaze found its first victim. Then one of the creatures spoke, a gurgling whisper from the darkness. "The bear and the wolf cannot protect you here," hissed the voice. In response to the taunt, the group of demented humans began to giggle and whine in the flickering shadows and light, a chorus of demonic laughter that sent a shiver down Kellick's spine. One by one they began to charge, twitching and squealing as they splattered through the muck toward the encampment. Kellick readied himself for the assault of his first two attackers, a shadowy, mangled man and a woman in linens matching his first foe. The man closed the gap first, letting out an agonizing howl as he swung a long, clawed hand at Kellick. Kellick parried with his right hand, the blade of Bear's Leer taking the man's arm off at the elbow. The agonizing howl intensified as the man staggered backward, looking at his missing arm in disbelief. For a fleeting second, Kellick thought he saw a flicker of human intelligence and immense sadness in the man's eyes before he lost his head.
From behind the tumbling, headless corpse, the woman sprang, taking Kellick completely off guard. He grunted as the air was forced from his lungs, the weight of her body connecting with his chest. She let out a crazed giggle as she snapped her diseased jaws at his shoulder, only coming into contact with the solid shell of his bear-jerkin carapace. Kellick let Wolf's gaze drop from his left hand, the blade sinking point down into the muck. He grabbed the woman by the back of the head and yanked her skyward with one hand by her decaying hair, then let Bear's Leer slice cleanly across her throat. He dropped the gurgling woman to let her choke on her own blood, his gaze already searching for his next victim. Time seemed to warp and stretch around Kellick, dissolving into a whirlwind of steel and fury. He was a blur of motion in the chaotic firelight, his twin blades, Wolf's gaze, and Bear's Leer singing a bloody duet. The air was thick with the scent of sulfur and a coppery tang he knew all too well. He could hear the rage of war around him, the demonic screams of the afflicted, the rallying cries of his remaining rhymesmen, and the sickening thud of bodies falling. Kellick cut two demons down at the knees simultaneously, a swift, brutal sweep that dropped them into the muck, and howled into the night himself, the sound a raw expression of his own bloodlust. Above him, the full moon, a silver coin in the vast inky sky, seemed to be his only guide, its light glinting off his blades. He felt a fleeting madness of his own, as if he were cutting deeper and deeper into an endless wave of decomposing shadows. With a powerful two-handed strike, he cleaved a gangly man in half, the blade parting flesh and bone with a wet, tearing sound. The man didn't scream. He simply exhaled slowly as his two halves fell apart, a grotesque marionette with its strings cut. Kellick's blood turned as cold as a Rimland night at what he saw next. Stepping from the shadows, a ghastly Wolvar stood before him, and he was dead. Multiple bite marks bled from various parts of his body, glistening in the firelight like freshly harvested devil's balls. He still held his sword and shield, a lifeless automaton in an eternal vigilance, his gaze fixed on Kellick, ready for one last, unending duel. "Brother," Wolvar whispered, his voice a dry rasp that was barely a breath. The moonlight illuminated his dark eyes, revealing a void of undeath, a horrifying emptiness that chilled Kellick to the core. This was not the Wolvar he knew, the gruff warrior with the black hair and surly sneer. This was a puppet, an abomination. From across the basin, a new, inhuman cry echoed into the war zone. It was a sound that was both a howl and a whisper, a sound of ancient rage and a terrible, mocking glee. It caused the dead war brother to snap his head toward the sound, his movements no longer his own. The cry made Kellick's heartbeat slow and sent a profound shiver deep down his spine. He widened his stance, ready to give his brother an honorable death, a final release from this horror, but the attack did not come. Without a word, without a glance back, Wolvar turned and disappeared into the blackness of the night, a ghost consumed by the thicket. Kellick exhaled, his hands shaking, his mind reeling from the impossible sight. My rhymesman, he thought, turning toward the camp, his heart pounding with a new, urgent fear. He saw the remaining demons retreating into the darkness, a wave of sickness washing back from the firelight. Overturned wagons and dismantled bodies lay in the camp's light where the horde had broken through. He could hear cries, but he couldn't tell if they were human or creature. In the distance, he saw Fenrix, a giant bathed in the vermilion glow of his axe, bringing it down on the head of a possessed Lotanian, splitting it in two. Kelyk looked skyward to the Moon Mother, her silver light shining brightly upon them, a cold, indifferent eye. He knew they would be back. But as he looked at the shimmering blades in his hands, their handles carved with a wolf and a bear, he realized the terrifying truth. The legends were wrong. The Hellsmouth's curse was not a random affliction, but a calculated pact, a deal with the very land itself. The bear and the wolf did not hunger for death. They hungered for something else entirely. And for a fleeting, horrifying moment, Kelyk understood. This was not just a battle for survival, it was a test. And the true prize of the Hellsmouth was not a cure or food, but the ancient power that had twisted his brothers into monsters. He clutched his swords tighter, the crystals in their hilts pulsing with a faint, malevolent light, and he knew then that his journey had just begun. He would not just survive, he would conquer. The power would be his, and he would not let it consume him as it had consumed the others.